And thank you, Gary. Boy, we have a lot of people on board now. We've got 65 people here, and that's very, very exciting. So, Rebecca, you're a big draw today. So let me just say that we uh, are going to be talking about COVID-19 and lessons learned in the post, hopefully soon, the post COVID-19 world. Uh, Rebecca Costa is our guest speaker today. She's an American sociobiologist. Do I have that right? Is that the proper term? A sociobiologist and a futurist too. Um, Rebecca is a global thinker. She's done a lot in her career over 4 decades. She has written several books. She's hosted a radio show and continues to be a speaker talking about things that are in the future, the big picture, if you will. She can certainly talk about it a lot better than I can, and that's why I'm going to introduce her now. So, Rebecca, take it away. Rebecca Costa, ladies and gentlemen.
If I can interrupt for just one moment.
Yes.
Just to say, Rebecca, I'm sorry, just to let folks know that because we have so many people in the room, we're going to ask you if you have questions for after her presentation, please type them into the chat area and Skip will share it with her.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, I wanted to be sure I was unmuted. Before I get started, I have to tell you a little Rotarian story. And that is that when I was a young girl, 17 going on 18, I had always aspired to go to college. I would have been the first person in my family to go to a university. And so I worked hard in high school, knowing what it would mean to my family. And I was admitted to several universities and had chose the University of California. And about 30 days before I was preparing to leave, my father informed me that we didn't have enough money for me to go to the university. He had hoped that a few jobs here and there were going to come through, and he felt terrible, but he felt that I could go to the local community college. Well, of course, this was a big disappointment to me. So I immediately got my mother's old typewriter. This was a manual typewriter. And I went down and spent the little bit of money that I had at a Xerox machine, copying my grades and my awards and my background, and stapled it to a letter and started sending it to anybody and everybody who I thought might care. And I want you to know that about 30 days before I was set to start at the University of California, I, in my fluffy bathrobe and my bunny slippers, walked down to the mailbox and there was a check from the local Rotary Club. It's because of the Rotarians. And I'm going to get a bit choked up about this, but I want you to know I'm a living example. I'm 65 years old, and I've had the career that I have had, and I've been able to do the good in the world that I have been able to do, whatever that may amount to, because of that check that the Rotarians sent me. And they said, we believe in you. Go to college. Do something good in the world. And I know you're all muted right now, but I want you to know that there are living examples out there of people who have benefited from your good works, and I am one of them. Now, at the time, I made a promise, and I said, I'll never forget this. And no matter what the Rotarians asked me to do, my answer is going to be yes, no matter what happens. But I did not. So Rotary clubs, call me every now and again and ask for help on, one thing or another, or to speak. But I didn't know you had 3,000 chapters. Before I made that promise, it would have been very good to have that data. So there you have it. So it was my honor to be able to speak to you today, particularly in trying times where we're all sheltering in place, at least the smart ones are. We're sheltering in place and we're sort of wondering, what is the world coming to? Now, as a sociobiologist that looks at the big picture, the COVID-19 disaster, if you will, or pandemic, is not a lot different from the dot-com and subprime financial collapse. And it's not really different from a dangerous climate event that sneaks up on us like a tsunami or a devastating hurricane, or the immediate collapse of a nation's currency, or even a sudden terrorist attack. These kinds of events, these game changers, they all have similar attributes. And so as a sociobiologist, I tend to look at these things more mechanically than other people would. We like to treat them differently, but they have certain characteristics. And one of the major characteristics that they have is that suddenly, all at one time, complexity goes up and data goes down. We have a marriage of two things that happen instantaneously. And other things go up. The velocity of the change begins to accelerate. The urgency of decision making. There are new demands. The variety of data and sources change. The number and the mix of the stakeholders in the decision change. The costs, the risk of failure, unproven beliefs and opinions rise. Reactivity rises, but so does innovation, creativity, teamwork and collaboration, and the speed of implementation all rise. And then on the other side, we have this depression, this downward movement. Foresight, deliberation, and planning goes down. Data veracity and reliability, testing data goes down. Approvals go down. Optimization, there's no time to optimize. Income and resources go down. Historical relevance goes down. Competition also decreases. Leadership decreases. Red tape and bureaucracy decrease. Decision time decreases. So we have these two things going on, complexity rising and data, the data that's essential for efficient decision-making goes down. What we effectively do is we go through 7 levels, and we go through them rather quickly, and I'll tell you which level we're at right now. We go through disbelief, denial, delay, and a complete misunderstanding of what exponentiation means. Then level 2 is we rush to act with very little and unverifiable data. And forced collaboration occurs. Collaboration between groups that have never worked together before and have to hurry up and figure out how to work together. Level 3 is we double down on the actions that show early effectiveness. Level 4 is we start to refine the data and the analytics and our priorities based on that new data. Level 5 is we begin to optimize and maximize our response. Level 6 is we start to institutionalize the successes for future readiness. And level 7 is we develop a predaptive culture. We start thinking, well, this isn't the only disaster that could happen. What could we do to be more resilient, more ready for like types of situations that could come about? I'm not going to have time to talk to you about all the levels today. But first, let me start with exponentiation. The human brain, to this point in time, and I'm an evolutionary biologist, so I can speak about the evolution of the brain. Our brains at this particular point in time are designed to solve problems that are linear. So we make linear mistakes. And this is really costly when you have something like a pandemic hit you. Now, let me give you a very simple example. Let's assume we have a pond. And it's a beautiful pond, and everything is thriving, and ecologically it's balanced. And let's assume that there is one lily pad in the pond. And every day, the number of lily pads is going to double. It so happens on day 36, the entire pond will be covered with lily pads. And the pond will descend into an ecological disaster. It will starve the pond of nutrition, the fish will begin to die, it will no longer be able to survive. So it's doubling every day, the number of lily pads. We start with 1, so on day 2 there's 2, on day 3 there's 4, and on day 36 the pond's going to be covered. So on what day is the pond only half covered? Well, if you're a really good linear evolved thinker, you say 36 cut in half, right? The pond's going to be half full, is 18 days. So day 18, the pond is half full. Everyone's shaking their head. No, the pond is half full on day 35. Within 24 hours after day 35, the pond is completely full and you have a disaster on your hands. But if you're a linear thinker and you think the pond is half full on day 18, you think you have 18 days to solve the problem, when in fact, you have 24 days. And this is how exponentiating problems get out of hand, because we make the mistake of thinking we have more time than we have to react. And we don't want to react unnecessarily. And so we try to use the 18 days that we don't have to respond to an emergency, when in fact we have 24 hours. Now, many of you caught the air right away, so you understand how these problems exponentiate. So let's talk about level 2. Level 1 is we're in denial and we let the problem get out of hand. It begins to move out of Wuhan on airplanes, and then suddenly it's populating everywhere else. And then we quash it down, and then what do? We reopen prematurely, and now we have a second wave, which according to my models, will be worse than the first wave. We are in for a very dangerous summer. I wish I had good news. I do have some on the back end, but it's not the news that you are hearing in the media. So then we rush to act on unverifiable data. My definition of complexity is there are more wrong solutions than there are right ones, and the number of wrong ones are exponentiating. So instead of trying to find a needle in a haystack, we're suddenly faced with trying to find a needle in dozens and dozens of stacks of needles, and they all look alike, and we're not able to make any discernment. What happens is certain symptoms show up when we're overwhelmed. One is the dilemma of overchoice. Too many options are the same as having none. You all know this if you've ever gone to buy toothpaste. I don't know how there can be in a complete grocery aisle of toothpaste. I happen to use Crest, and I noticed there was Crest with mouthwash and Crest with cavity protection and Crest with whitener in them, and on all different types of Crest, right? And there were 30, I counted them in my grocery store, which is a pretty fancy upscale store. There were 38 types of Crest that I could buy. But there was one that said Crest Complete. If it's complete, I would assume it has all the others in it. So I don't know why you need the others, but there must be some reason. Again, when you have the dilemma of overchoice, you're frequently paralyzed by that, because having too many choices, the human brain reacts in a way that is the same as having no choices. We simply don't respond. There's one of the other symptoms which occurs when we get overwhelmed and we can't decide is that there's a massive confusion between empirical facts and unproven beliefs and opinions. We are unable to make any discernment there. Obviously, paralysis by analysis. When do we stop looking and collecting data and actually act? We become very fear-based that we're going to fail. We don't like to fail. That's not good for our self-esteem. It's not good for our careers. There's nothing good about failing. And so we become very fearful and failure avoidant. Hippo, you probably heard that term in business. Hippo is the highest paid person, its opinion in the room wins. And that's not really a logical way in which to choose or to make decisions. And then lastly, there's institutional resistance. Let us not forget we're Pavlovian. The reason companies like Kodak, who were once giants in the American economy, go out of business is because we're Pavlovian. When we get rewarded by the marketplace, when we get rewarded in our personal lives for a certain type of behavior or a certain type of output, then we are designed, we are hardwired to continue that behavior. And so change is very hard. And believe me, at my age, and at the age of some of you that I see here that have got the same white hair, I will tell you, it's very difficult to change, right? Because this has been so reinforced. We can even look at the brain and see that there are neural pathways that have dug into your brain physiologically. So changing your golf swing, quitting smoking, getting on a better diet, the older you get, the harder it gets to make those changes. And in institutions, it's even harder. I'm going to go through a couple more things here with you because I want to hit a couple of major notes. When you have a lot of options, what should you do? When you don't have verifiable data, is there some way in which you can choose the most logical course of action? I don't want to promote my book, but I'm going to for about 2 seconds here because I can't go through the 12 adaptive principles in the time that we have together today. But what I will tell you is that in On the Verge, which was my last book, I do go through each of the 12 adaptive principles that are used by nature very successfully to overcome quick changes in the environment. We've studied animals and even single-celled organisms, and we know that they have certain adaptive strategies that have worked when the environment makes a sudden shift. And those are certainly applicable to our day-to-day lives and to organizations as well. And one of those applicable strategies that I'm going to talk about today is diversification. In a complex, high failure rate environment, I'm going to say that again, a complex, high failure rate environment, how do you decide? What is the correct and most likely to be successful response? It's diversification. You all participate in a high failure rate complex environment. It's your financial portfolio. Can you think of a more complex high failure rate environment than Wall Street, right? I mean, it's been going up and then loses 1,000 points, and boy, you know, it's a good thing I don't have time to be a day trader or watch my portfolio every day, or I'd have a heart attack. Because I'm also on the road to retirement, and I just can't even look at the financial news every day. But the good thing is I have a financial advisor, and he said you have to diversify. Because you don't want to put all your money on one stock. Most of you have not put your money on one stock. You bought some bonds, you have some money in savings, you own real estate, you diversify so that if one thing goes down, you're hoping the other goes up and vice versa. It doesn't always work that way, but it's your safest call. So when you're facing something like COVID-19, you kind of have to think like a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists have lots of really smart analysts that go in and look at future technologies and future patents that are going to come down, and they have to place smart bets, lots of small smart bets. But then they have clear levels of triage. So they might fund a lot of projects through round one. They may go into 3D printing or robotics, and they'll say, all right, these 10 or these 5 robotic companies look like winners based on our analysis. We're going to fund them all through round one. But come round 2, they're going to take a look at the empirical data. How much progress have these companies made? And fewer get round 2 funding. And even fewer still get round 3 funding. But at the end of the day, some of them are going to be successful. It's just that they can't call it on the front end. And that's the case with a disaster like COVID-19. You're not going to be able to call it on the front end. So you have to make lots of small bets and then let the data decide what's going to get triage and what's not going to. And along those lines, those small bets can be looked at in 2 ways. One are market-driven solutions, and the other are moonshots. Market-driven solutions are not things you're going to invent. They're things that you can apply to a particular problem, and they're market-driven. People want you to do it, so you're going to go do it. College campuses, they just closed the campus. That was market-driven. The parents, the students wanted them, the teachers wanted the campuses closed. They closed them down, right? They didn't invent anything to allow a distance education to occur. All those things were existing. They just put those things together. Moonshots are the other type of innovative response. A moonshot is where you're going to actually go make something or create a methodology that has never been used before in response to a crisis. So let me explain what I mean by that. Let's look at the United States government's diversified response to COVID-19. Under market-driven, we can say, there are a lot of things we did. We diversified our response, and this is why it's been effective. And by the way, I'm apolitical, so I'm not promoting Donald Trump or Congress or any particular political individual. I'm just talking about the general response of the United States government. Number 1, social distancing, shelter in place. They formed a task force. They started checking temperature. They urged hand washing, masks and gloves, disinfecting surfaces, contact tracing, Defense Production Act that they evoked. They called for volunteerism, hydroxychloroquine, convalescent plasma therapy, remdesivir, drive-through testing, closed public institutions and parks, closed air travel from infected areas, the CARES Protection Program, the Supplemental Unemployment Program, CFAP food assistance, SBA small business loans, state and local government assistance, local suspension of evictions, IRS deadline suspension and leniency, the FFCRA tax credit, daily press conferences, early prison releases, insurance company cooperation, student loan payment deferment. There's a long list of things. The government did exactly what that response should be. It has to be diversified because we don't know what's going to work. You can't call it on the front end. And then let's look at moonshots. What kind of moonshots did they have? Vaccines, faster, easier, economical testing, and new treatments and pharmaceuticals. Those are the moonshots, things that have never been invented before and need to be invented, but they're very high risk and they're very expensive. So the market-driven items are not high risk, they're inexpensive, and they can be deployed immediately. The moonshots, very high risk, extremely expensive, and very unlikely to succeed. I will tell you, we're not going to have a vaccine for a long time. In 1984, when AIDS was breaking out, some of you remember that, we didn't know how AIDS was being transmitted. There was some scientific paper that came out that said if a mosquito bit a person with AIDS and bit another person, maybe some of you remember, nod your head if you remember this, that if a mosquito bit another person, that suddenly you could contract AIDS, and everyone was up in arms and killing every mosquito in a 100-mile range. At that time, the head of Health and Human Services of the United States came out and said, all hands on deck, we're going to develop a vaccine for AIDS. That was 36 years ago. We do not have a vaccine for AIDS. We're not good at vaccines. Worse than that, we've identified, and I am a scientist, so I'm on top of all of the clinical data, we've identified 18 mutations to COVID-19. Even if we get a vaccine, it's likely to be less than 10% effective. which is even giving people a false sense of security. So a vaccine is really not, I'm going to go against a lot of publicity that you've heard. A vaccine's not likely. Here's what we're good at. You don't have to die of AIDS anymore. We're good at finding a treatment that will prevent you from dying. So what is much more likely to happen in the next 6 to 8 months, if you can just hold on a little while, is that you might get some symptoms, not feel very good, go into your physician's office, he'll test you immediately, write you a prescription for something, and then you'll go home and you'll feel bad for a day or two, but you will not die. And once the threat of death is taken off the table, things will begin to resume normal. But not until the threat of death. Then it becomes just like any other ailment. You get the flu, you go in, you get some drugs, you feel better. That is much more likely to occur. So I've gone through diversification. I've talked to you a little bit about what kinds of therapies might be on the way. Let me see if I can go through here. You'll excuse me here, it's not ideal not to have my slides up, but we could not figure out yesterday how to get the slides to let me manually operate them. So I hope you'll forgive me the awkwardness of some of this. At the end of the day, we know that the government was very, very good at providing diversified solutions. And some of those panned out and some didn't. And most we don't know. We don't know what impact the CARES program had. We know hydroxychloroquine. I can never get that out. I'm sorry. It just doesn't want to come out of my mouth nicely. We know that doesn't work. So that's easy triage, right? Some of the other things that we kind of don't have enough data to know is the increase in unemployment pay. How much of an effect did that really have on Americans? We don't really know. Some of the food assistance programs, we don't know. We're finding out disinfecting surfaces really doesn't have the pack the punch, and actually wearing masks is much more important than disinfecting surfaces. So we're learning as we go, and some of these things are going to fall off the triage list and we won't be doing them anymore. One thing we do know is that we have such powerful computers that now we can use those computers to put this new real-time data together and look for patterns. And that's a game changer for us because it means that we can pre-adapt. We don't have to always be adapting and reacting to a situation. We can try to get out ahead of these situations, particularly if they're likely. Genetic testing is a method of pre-adaptation. Think about it, 50 years ago, we couldn't have tested you for certain types of cancer. But now we can test you and say your likelihood for certain types of cancers and certain types of other diseases. And in many cases, we have the ability to head those off and prevent you from being able to get those diseases. So the next real big change in the way that we operate as a society is really to get out ahead of these changes and not to be reactive to them. Let me give you another example that's particularly pertinent to us. We know when an elderly person is going to trip and fall with almost 90% accuracy 3 weeks before they're going to trip and fall. Now, many times when I tell people this, they go, that's impossible. You can't tell me I'm going to trip and fall within the next 3 weeks. And I say, yes, I can. Because we've now discovered that there is somewhere between maybe a 3 to 5 millimeter change in your normal walking gait that precedes that fall. We didn't know that before. suddenly your normal walking gait changes by something that's indiscernible to the human eye, and that you would deny that your walking gait has changed at all. But it's the precursor to you falling. And you have a 90% chance of tripping and falling as a result of that within a 3-week window. So there are people in Silicon Valley right now that are developing Fitbit-like devices for your ankle that will ping your phone and ping your caretaker's phone and ping your family's phone and say, hey, your walking gait has changed, right? And you're in danger of tripping and falling. And we all know what that means for people that are elderly. It means many times losing their ability to live independently. You break a hip, you break a knee, you're in assisted living. It is assumed that this technology will allow someone to live independently 3 to 5 additional years as a result of simply avoiding falls. We also can use technology and data to look for people that might commit mass violence or suicide or are becoming depressed. We know what danger words are to look for in social media. These are some of the danger words: hate, bored, depressed, mad, killed, dead, profanity, sick, tired, jealous, lonely, murder, idiot, sucks, bull, pain, pathetic, losers, crap, ignorant, never, destroy, worst, awful, hurt. We know these words, we can search for them. Here are the well-being words that indicate someone is thriving: fantastic, travel, nature, friend, family, volunteer, vacation, great, love, nice, ha ha. That's one of the words, that's my favorite one. So in conclusion, and I'm happy to take questions, the first person to live to be 1,000 years old is, according to Aubrey Dubray, who's a genetic mathematician, if you didn't know there was such a thing, at the University of Cambridge. He has done all the math, and he has discovered that the first person to live to be 1,000 years old is already walking the planet today. And that means there are more people, more ways, more data, and the right way to use that data is to use AI and predictive analytics to be able to get out in front of crises. But if we can't get out in front, the next best thing is to have a plan so that we can be as resilient and adaptive as possible by using the principles of adaptation, including diversification, which I talked about today. So I'm going to stop on that note, and I'd be happy to take questions. Is that all right, Skip? I think you're on mute, maybe. Hello?
Skip, you're on mute.
Okay. Yes, I know. I think I'm unmuted now. Okay. Rebecca, that was fabulous. Thank you. So anybody that has a question, just type it in right now, and then we will pass it on to Rebecca. Now, we have this question from Gary. I'm not quite sure I know what this is. Is the shock doctrine at work now? I have no idea what that is.
I don't know either. Jerry will have to tell us.
The shock doctrine is a book that was published years ago about when some major catastrophe occurs, then some governments can take advantage of that to pass bad legislation and make bad decisions. An example of that is after 9/11. The Patriot Act had been written years before, but they couldn't figure out how to implement it. When 9/11 occurred, all of a sudden, the Patriot Act was passed within days or weeks. And nobody could figure out how they could pass it that soon. Of course, nobody read it. That was a terrible shock to the system of government in the United States. So if you haven't read the shock doctrine, I highly recommend you read it, because this pandemic was a shock to the entire world, not only to the United States. And so my fear is that some of that will be used to do dastardly deeds.
Well, I think what you're talking about is opportunists that, you know, take advantage of disasters. And, you know, there are even opportunists that were raising the price of toilet paper. I mean, that's not largely different than taking advantage and trying to sneak in legislation. That's always going to happen. You know, I believe that the system in the United States is strong enough that we can accommodate a certain percentage of poor legislation, even though, because we have methods for undoing bad decisions that we make in the heat of crisis. In a crisis, we're not very clear thinkers. And there's always going to be some decisions that we make that are you know, later rethought and changed and tempered. But, you know, I don't argue with you that there's going to be, you know, political opportunists, just like they're going to be retail opportunists. I don't think politics is largely different than how retailers or business people think.
Rebecca, we have a question here from one of our participants, and the question or comment is that, so we should continue to shelter in place and social distance with masks. That's going to be the standard operating procedure for now and the foreseeable future.
I am not in the business of, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not in the business of giving other people advice. I can only tell you what I know and on what basis I'm making my decision. I'm not afraid of diseases unless they'll kill me. So when they have a treatment, I don't really care about the vaccine. When they have a treatment that will prevent me from dying, the vaccines sort of don't matter anymore. And we have clues that are really important clues in science on how to disarm the COVID-19 virus from reproducing so quickly, and also from doing permanent damage to the lungs. So these important clues are allowing us to move very quickly on a treatment. So I believe that it is a good idea to shelter in place, even though you might be bored. I always think of it as a litmus test on how much do you love the life you've created for yourself. You know, people who never really had a good home life and a good social structure, they're really suffering right now. But I think it's sort of a come to Jesus moment, you know, where you take an assessment about the quality of your life and what's important. And if you like the life, if you like your home, the way your home is situated, you know, I'm very fortunate. I focused on my life. I have a beautiful garden. I have well, I don't know if this is a good thing. I have a 6-month-old lab puppy who's driving me a bit batty, like some spouses are driving each other batty. But, you know, I have a good life. So the sheltering in place, while I miss my friends and my family and being able to travel, which I like to do, you know what, the adjustment hasn't been as great for me. And I'm continuing to work. That's a big part of it as well.
Is there any word of, I know that you, I said you're not a particular believer in vaccines. And in fact, I think I read somewhere that you think there was only maybe 1 or 2 vaccines ever that have been effective.
There's only one. There's only one vaccine. I base my opinions on data, historical data or real-time data. So if you don't know this, vaccines have been miserably unsuccessful. There's only one disease, human disease, that's been eliminated by vaccines off the face of the earth. That's smallpox. All other diseases, from the bubonic plague to, you know, just name a disease, they all exist somewhere in the world, ready to rear their ugly heads. We've been We don't the reason vaccines don't work well is because we don't really understand the human immune system. And the best place, by the way, to get information that I'm talking to you about is the Human Vaccines Project. If you want up-to-date info on the progress of vaccines that hasn't been shaped by the mainstream media, if you really want data, go to the Human Vaccines Project, and that's where you'll get the real scoop.
A lot of comments here. We have a comment about when do you think, for some of the people that are currently in the United States, when do you think it'll be safe to travel back to San Miguel? But you said you're not in the business of giving advice.
I don't know what the outbreak situation is in Mexico. I don't have enough information to really advise you on travel at all. You know, you can get those numbers, and again, you have to understand that testing is far lower than we need. So whatever the numbers are, they're too low.
Getting a couple of comments about your remark about the only vaccine that's been effective is the smallpox vaccine. Rotary is a major supporter of. We have a
the polio initiative.
I'm talking. Yeah, it's the Polio Plus. Yeah. What about
I'm
polio?
aware of it. Yeah, polio's not gone.
Okay.
We're almost there, but we haven't eliminated all polio cases yet.
Well, I remember as a child that every kid lived in fear that they would spend the rest of their lives in an iron lung. And I can remember in grade school standing in a long line in the hallway, going down and getting my sugar cube with the polio vaccine. And It seemed to take, I mean, all of a sudden the cases of polio dramatically dropped.
Yes, and they're very low right now, but you can verify everything I'm telling you on the internet. The only disease that we've completely 100% wiped off the face of the earth is smallpox. There's still cases of polio, and Rotary has done a phenomenal job, along with the Gates Foundation, of almost eradicating polio, but we can't say it's completely gone yet.
Anything on the horizon as far as an effective treatment?
Yes, you've all heard about remdesivir. We saw some positive effects from remdesivir. We are seeing some positive effects from some steroids. The individual drugs themselves are not that are in the headlines are not of interest to me. It's what the drug does and the clues that it offers scientists that we're on the right path. This is exactly what happened when we discovered what AZT did in the case of AIDS. Then we knew, because we had a string we could pull, right, out of a ball of yarn, and we had something to grab onto. And that is the case in terms of treatment. So I feel very positive that we will have a treatment very soon. And then the vaccine issue, we're not good at keeping you from getting a disease, but we're very good at keeping you from dying from one.
All right, very good. Anybody else have any other questions? I want to thank you.
Well, thank you. Again, I apologize for the awkwardness of having to look down at pages and all of that. And I'd just like to conclude my remarks the way that I opened them. I thank you so much for the opportunity to go to the university, to get my graduate degree, for the support that the Rotarians gave me to do the work I'm doing, but more importantly, to have the life I'm having. So what you do matters, and I cannot thank you enough for what you have done for me and will do for others.
Very good.
Well, I could speak for myself. This has been enlightening to hear a reasonable, thoughtful remarks on where we really are, instead of all the opinions and fantasies and all the other bullshit that's been spread throughout. This was very enlightening, so thank you.
keep in mind, 36 years and we don't have a vaccine for AIDS, and not because we haven't put a lot of money and a lot of good scientists to work on it.
Correct. I'm not waiting for a
Don't listen
vaccine.
to the media regarding that. But as soon as
Yep.
there's a treatment and you're not going to die, you can get back out there again.
Absolutely. So
And I
thank
think
you very much.
that's the good news. That's the good news. Thanks, Rebecca.